What a privilege it is to be here with you this morning. I am just so full of gratitude as I reconnected just recently, spent some time at your new facility with Pastor Nate a few weeks ago. I mean, it's been 4 years since I've been here, and there's been so much change in your lives and the life of this church, and it's so encouraging for me to be here with you today. Yeah, tons of change. I get a couple of questions these days. The first one I get is, what are you doing for work these days? I tell people that I transport precious cargo. I work for Capital Taxi, and I drive limousine service, and I drive a wheelchair van. Two things about that. One is some of the precious cargo is more precious than others. And I do need to apologize for every person that I've cut off out on the roads or done a U-turn in front of you and caused you to, get angry and mad at me. So I apologize for that, just trying to live up to that reputation of being a taxi driver. The other question that I get is how are you doing these days? How are things going? Life is going great. I was remarried 2 years ago, and Gail is here, and I hope to get an opportunity to introduce her to you today. 11 months ago, yesterday, I received a heart transplant at Toronto General Hospital. And a huge shout out today to Trillium Gift of Life. They're the organization that administrates the donor program. So grateful for them. And I remember distinctly as I was rolled down the hallway after we got to the hospital after receiving the call 11 months ago, that I was entering the fight of my life for my life. And I'd prepared for that in this way. I knew that I couldn't enter a fight like that without an army of people around me, praying, lifting us up. And I want to thank you. I know many of you here have prayed diligently, didn't fall asleep at the wheel, so to speak. And it's made an enormous difference. It's such a privilege to be here today. I love reading the gospel stories. I love the narratives of Jesus. They reflect and they reveal some things that I just love. Narratives of Jesus show us that Jesus connects with people from what seems to be every corner of life. The conversations that he has with people, they all seem to be about this one thing: life change. And recently, as I was preparing for this morning, I found myself reading again for the first time one of these Jesus narratives, these stories from Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. And as I reread it again, I read and I paused and I reflected. I read and I paused and I even chuckled. I saw things in that passage I hadn't seen in years. And some of the things that God showed me, I thought, I can't keep this to myself. And so this morning, under the title of When Jesus Heals Your Life, I want us to take and spend some time this morning in Luke chapter 7. Let me start reading. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house, and he reclined at the table. Real easy to read over that fast. That statement there is going to come back in towards the end of the story. We're going to get some clarification on that. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and then poured perfume on them. I noticed that none of you chuckled when I read that. None of you laughed. I'm going to have to talk to Pastor Nate, but I think we're going to have to raise the fun factor here at Pathway. What do I mean? Well, let me share a bit of an overview of what I just read. A woman enters this dinner party uninvited. What did she do? She crashed the party. That's what she did. When was the last time you crashed a party? Oh my gosh, not one hand. We're going to have to raise the fun factor here. No one's ever crashed a party? Oh my gosh, it was 3 years ago for me. I'd finished up, some of you aren't surprised, are you? I'd finished up a wedding, and the reception was at a hotel in a hall. So I made my way to the hotel, and as I walked around this giant hotel, I realized that there was more than just one reception that day. I have the gift of reading minds, eh? So I enter this ballroom, and I'm dressed the part. And so I get a club soda in line, and I'm walking around, and before long, it's like, hey, I'm Kirk, who are you? Oh, Stan, great to meet you. Boy, what a day these guys got. Anyways, I almost got my picture taken with the bride and groom. This woman, she brings perfume. Men and women process smells very, very differently. I mean, you take the stores in the mall that sell all those smelly candles, right? You very rarely see a man in one of those stores, as a gross generalization. I mean, there would be a man in one of those stores if it was the day before Christmas and he hadn't done his Christmas shopping. Men and women process smells very differently. Any man that belongs to a gym club has a gym bag. This is the time of the year that I remember fondly would start a hockey season, and remember year after year sitting in the change room and opening up those hockey bags, and there was always one or two guys that open up that hockey bag. It hadn't been opened all summer, and grab the t-shirt from the bottom and hold it up, and how come men sort of hold that like a badge of honor, that kind of stuff? I saw the humor in this story a little bit. And at dinner time, the woman begins to weep. Now, men, how uncomfortable are we when we're in the presence of a woman who is weeping? It's uncomfortable. Why? We want it to stop. We want to fix what's wrong. Yeah, we don't do well in that atmosphere. She cleans Jesus' feet with her tears. She unfurls her hair and dries his feet. Then she kisses them. I'll ask you a question. When was the last time you had somebody kiss your feet in public? Can't remember. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm just trying to get to know the audience. We're warming up a little bit here, which is good. I just imagine sitting at the food court at the mall. Somebody who I hadn't seen in a while. Oh, for crying out loud, how you doing? Pull my shoes and socks off and they kiss my foot in public. It's never happened to me. Hasn't happened to you. And then she pours perfume on his feet. Let's pick up the passage in verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he says to himself, "Self, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, can I tell you something?" "Go ahead and tell me, teacher." Two men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed $500. The other owed $50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debt of both. Now let me ask you a question, Simon. Which one of them will love him more? And after scratching his head, Simon said, "Well, I suppose the one with the larger debt canceled." And Jesus said, "Way to go, Simon. You got one right." As we move through this narrative, we have a very awkward situation. See, in Simon's mind, Jesus doesn't have a clue who this woman is. In Simon's mind, she's one of those. Let's just hit pause for a moment. We are 20 centuries removed. We are halfway around the world. And when I say one of those, you know exactly what I mean. We do the same thing with people. They're one of those. The other thing that we do sometimes is even after 20 years, we think of people the same way. We tend not to update our view of people very well. Jesus didn't see her as one of those. He saw her as someone in need of life change. And he knew exactly what to do, because that's exactly what he does. This is a classic Jesus story for a couple of reasons. One is, Jesus seems to have a special place in his heart for the overlooked, the cast aside in society, those people in our world. The second reason this is a classic Jesus story is that it includes one of Jesus' classic questions. A question that the entire passage rests on. It's a question that you and I are going to consider for the balance of our time. Which one loves more? We pick up the story again in verse 44. Then he turned towards the woman and he says to Simon, he turns towards the woman, but he's talking to Simon. What's going on here? Jesus is doing the non-direct. Okay? And as he faces the woman, and as he talks to Simon, he asks this question. Simon, do you see this woman? Simon, do you see this woman? Simon's response. Do I see this woman? She busted into this dinner of ours. She stunk the entire place up with her perfume. Do I see this woman? You bet I see this woman. That's what it says in the Hebrew. And then Jesus opens up a can, so to speak. You did not give me any water for my feet. In that culture, what was perfectly normal, which was just part of the way things worked in that society, was that when somebody entered your home, you either had a person with a basin of water and a towel to wash your feet before you entered in, or there was water and a towel available for you to wash your feet. Jesus says, you didn't do that, Simon. But she wet my feet with her tears, and she wiped them with her hair. Simon, you did not... Hold on for just one sec here. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time that I entered, has not stopped kissing me. Once again, we got to understand the culture. In that culture, when men greeted one another, a little, touch cheeks or a little, that's how they greeted each other on the cheek. Now, in some cultures, Middle East, it would be three, bang, bang, and then bang. You got to be careful because the last thing you want is to be, touching noses together. But this was a normal way of doing things. It says, you did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. What's the oil on the head thing? Once again, in that culture, perfectly normal, perfectly natural. Men would receive a bit of oil, oftentimes mixed with water, rub it in their hands. They would rub that through their hair and on their face. It was a way of actually freshening themselves up. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. I think we need to talk about forgiveness. Church is probably a good place to do that. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is for yourself. Came across a word that I've just found helpful to unpack and even describe forgiveness in a fuller way. The word released. It's about offering release to somebody. It's about receiving release. It's about being released. Sense of freedom. Let me illustrate. The year prior to my transplant, and then of course these last 11 months post-transplant, I've spent a considerable amount of time at Toronto General for a variety of appointments, seeing doctors and specialists and whatnot. And this one day, I'm sitting in a doctor's office waiting, and for some reason, my face was fixed to the television set. And of course, everybody's favorite daytime host was on there, Oprah. And she had 7 ladies on the show this one day. And they were sharing their stories. Horrific stories. Gut-wrenching stories. The kinds of relationships that they were in. And as I'm watching, I noticed that in each case, Oprah puts up her hand, just like this, in front of the woman speaking. And she says right out, "You got to forgive." She did that 7 times. What I found fascinating was each one of them pushed back at Oprah. And after an exchange, she said, "If you don't forgive, the situation that you're in will always have a hold on you. It is going to continue to cripple you. If you are going to move ahead, you must be released." I'm sitting there, this waiting room, thinking, "You go, girl! You got it!" I thought, my God, she's got it better than we get in church sometimes. What's it about? This is what life change is all about. It's what we see in this woman in the story. So forgiveness is about offering. It's about receiving, being, living with a sense and experience of freedom. One of the things that fascinates me about this narrative is the marked contrast between the woman who has such freedom how she's been changed and transformed on this side, and Simon on this side. So what's Simon's narrative? Well, he thought that he was better than he actually was. The Simon narrative is this: he took his own stuff for granted. He developed this thing that we call a religious spirit. A religious spirit assumes that I'm right, and everybody else is wrong and off the mark. A religious spirit has a way of forgetting that the grace of God is for everybody. But it really is all about love. The religious spirit forgets what authentic humility really looks like. The religious spirit has a way of forgetting that it really is all about love. The woman's narrative is one of forgiveness, of release. I came across this quote by Nancy Guthrie this week. "Jesus does not look for people who are perfect and have never failed or made mistakes to be in his family. Instead, he is drawn towards people who recognize their failures and see their need for him." Do you have a need for Jesus today? How does somebody experience forgiveness? What does that look like? Some words. Being forgiven. Being released. That at a point of time, in a moment, it's one of those things where I'll never forget where I was when this occurred. It's about feeling forgiven. A stride in your step. Walking around feeling a little like shoulders back, head up. It's about accepting it not doubting it. And on accepting. Of all the voices that we listen to, I think one of the most dangerous voices that we listen to in our lives is our own. Has a way of getting us off track sometimes. It's about experiencing forgiveness. Taking that release and taking that forgiveness and stepping out and exercising it. Sharing it. It's about acknowledging and remembering. Never forgetting where we've come from. Remembering how far we've come. This is enormous. A couple of years, well, more than that, as I get older, time seems to get all messed up. A number of years ago, I was in the leadership training, and one of the things that they did at the very beginning of this training was they did a number of assessments, psychological assessments and, personality profiles and all those sorts of things. And I was fascinated, once it was all over, to sit down with my mentor, sort of go through with them the results. And things were going great. I received a tremendous amount of encouragement, and it was going better than I thought. Until one paragraph was read in this assessment that took me off guard. The mentor said, as I poured through the results, I want to share this with you. You have a propensity to be extremely selfish, to get very angry at the most menial things and lash out to people. You have a propensity to be a chameleon, to act in a certain way where other people will like you because of this insecurity that you have. You can become very quick to be vindictive. Of course, what did I think? Yeah, there's 47 people in the class. You've mixed up the paperwork, because that's not me. Yeah. So at that time, I came home with my file folder under my arm. And at that time, I sat down with my wife, Linda, sharing about what the week was like. I said, I want you to take a look at some of this stuff and give me some of your feedback. So, pass this sheet of paper, and there was a long period of silence. And I know what was going on there. She wanted me to suffer for a little bit. She said, I think they're right. I know they're right. She said, that's exactly who you would be if you failed to follow Jesus. Some of you know that you need it. Not necessarily wanting it right now. Some of you are here and there's people in your lives that are rooting for you and cheering you on to take that step, to make that move. This love of God that we've been singing about that's coming after us. Could be time for you to embrace that. See, this woman who came to Jesus, she did so because she knew it. It was time. She wanted it, and she went after it. It really is simply about love. Both Testaments talk about it. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God. And love those around you. Love them just like yourself. This is one we got to get right. Time to land the plane? Great. I'm just over Windsor now. So. Our capacity to give and receive love is what defines us. Nothing we have accomplished in our lifetime matters as much as the way we have loved our Lord Jesus and one another. Love is the very anchor, substance, and essence of our life. When this gets a hold of us, what does it really look like? One of the things that I suffer and struggle with and through after my transplant is something called survivor's remorse. Because I know that for me to stand here in front of you today and be as healthy as I am at this point, the sacrifice was a life. I have never forgotten that, and I will never forget that. Ultimate sacrifice. I'm afraid in my life it's taken me too long, way too long, to see that with respect to what the Lord Jesus Christ did for me. And I'm afraid that for too long I've dilly-dallied around. I've flirted with it. A question, a contrast, and a consideration I leave with you. The question, which one? Which one loves more? A contrast, the contrast between selfishness, the religious spirit, and the selflessness that embraces Christ and loves those around. And a consideration, I love this. What Jesus did in the life of the woman, He wants to do in my life, and He wants to do in your life. The Lord bless you, keep you, make His face to shine upon you.